I'm Kevin Knab, the Associate Pastor for Pastoral Care. I picked this text because it's the lectionary text for the week. The lectionary is what is used by a lot of different churches to say what to preach on. So I pinned myself down by choosing this passage. But this passage has Jesus wrestling with a whole bunch of entities, with God, with Pharisees, with Herod, with his own desire to fulfill what he had been called to do, and even with death. There's expectations that he wrestles with. And so it fits the theme that we're working on as well as being the lectionary text. I think one of the big things about this text is that we all have to make a choice about whether we are going to follow Jesus or not. What Jesus did was do what he was called to do. What Jesus did was fulfill what had been prophesied about himself. But what we need to do is make that choice. What we need to do is say, yes, we're going to follow. So this passage asks us essentially to wrestle with God, just as Jesus is wrestling with all of the aspects of his life around him. You know, I'm not so sure we actually wrestle with God as much as we wrestle with our ideas about who God is and our expectations of who we think God should be. You know, one of the times that we often are told it's okay to wrestle with God is when tragedy occurs. But what we forget is that tragedy has been occurring every day for humans throughout the entirety of our existence. And so we wrestle with the idea of why a good God would let something bad happen, but we're not necessarily, in my opinion, wrestling actually with God. We're wrestling with that expectation that nothing bad should have happened to us. So oftentimes what this wrestling is us dealing with our own concepts. If you think about Jesus in the passage in Luke 13, he's having to wrestle with a concept of the fact that the Messiah was supposed to be someone that was going to lead the people, and yet he's someone who's going to be crucified. And so the wrestling is wrestling with the ideas and expectations that we have. There was a great film that came out this year called Ex Machina. It comes from that theme of God and the machine. In other words, something coming into a story that just overwhelmingly controls everything. And the main character in that story creates an artificially intelligent robot, but gets upset and more upset as that robot and those robots begin to have their own thoughts and to have their own ideas, and to the fact that they actually rebel against him. So I think the reason that we have the ability to be able to wrestle with God is because we weren't created as robots. We weren't created as automatons. We were created as people who are meant to interact with him, who are meant to cry with him, who are meant to yell at him sometimes, who are meant to praise him, who are meant to even worship him. And so all this together reminds us that God created us to be allowed to wrestle with God.